Samuel Cato, 46, had learned to read the silence of the forest before he learned to read the forest itself. 6 years in Bwindi. 6 years of damp pre-dawn hours and trails that disappeared into the undergrowth and radios crackling with voices that needed to stay calm even when there was no reason to be. He knew how to tell the difference between the healthy silence of the forest, birds, wind, the distant creak of branches under animal weight, and the other kind. The one that came after something had gone wrong. It was 4:40 in the morning when the radio broke the darkness of the post. The voice on the other end was James, the most senior tracker in the North Sector. Too calm. Samuel, you need to come to the North Sector. We have a sighting. He didn't ask anything else. He grabbed his equipment and went. The slope was treacherous at that hour. The previous night's rain had turned the red earth into living clay, and roots emerged from the mud like traps. Samuel knew every bend in that path. He knew the point where the vegetation closed so completely that you had to walk sideways, and the point where it opened suddenly into a small clearing that the forest seemed to maintain for reasons of its own. He reached James's position at 5:42. The sky had not yet decided whether it was going to get light. James was standing at the edge of the vegetation, binoculars in hand, not moving. Samuel followed the direction of his gaze before raising his own binoculars. The group was 140 meters away, partially obscured by the subcanopy. Most of the females were clustered near the dominant male, but there was one separated from the others at a lower position on the slope, her back turned to the team. She was holding something against her chest. Samuel adjusted the focus. The light was poor, that pre-dawn gray that isn't good for anything, but there was something in her posture that he recognized before he could see clearly. The specific curve of the shoulders, the way the arms closed around what she carried. "How long has she been like this?" he asked quietly. "Since I arrived," said James. "But from the group's behavior, I think it was all night." Samuel watched for a long moment. Then the radio crackled again, and a voice from base requested an update. He brought the device to his lips and asked them to confirm the adult female's record in the North Sector by dorsal marking. 30 seconds of silence. Then the response came back. F7, 12 years old, 6 years of continuous monitoring, 3 pregnancies, 2 offspring that reached subadulthood. This was the third. Samuel lowered the radio slowly. He had watched F7 give birth 2 years earlier. He had documented the first time she let the infant crawl alone 2 meters from her, the tension visible in every muscle until he came back. He had watched her reprimand the animal with a guttural sound when he approached the dominant male too closely before the right moment. He knew her rhythms. He knew the position she assumed when she slept, the way she chose the tender leaves before eating. And he knew that shoulder curve. He had seen it in other females, in other groups, on other mornings that had begun exactly like this one. The infant was not moving. In the hours that followed, the team held their distance and recorded. F7 was carrying the infant ventrally, as she would if he were alive, against her chest, with one hand supporting his weight from below. The infant hung without muscle tone. There was no active resistance, no grasping reflex. The infant was male, approximately 7 months old. Until 48 hours earlier, every record indicated normal development. The most likely cause, when field veterinarian Claire Ndungu was contacted by radio at 8 in the morning, was pneumonia. The previous months had been atypically cold and wet on the southern slope. There was a documented pattern of respiratory infections in gorilla infants under 12 months during those climatic windows. Progression could be rapid. "If he's still alive," said Claire, "we have a window, but will depend on access." Samuel did not respond immediately. He was watching F7 through the binoculars. She had stopped on a fallen trunk and was examining the infant, tilting her head, running her fingers through his fur with the kind of meticulous attention that gorillas reserve for social grooming, as if she might find the problem there and correct it, as if it were a matter of searching carefully enough. "Access," he finally said, "is going to be the problem." The first approach attempt happened at 10:20. Samuel and James advanced in an arc from the side, using the vegetation as cover, keeping their profiles low. The protocol was clear. Slow movements, no direct eye contact with a male, curved posture to appear smaller. It was the same approach that had worked hundreds of times during habituation and monitoring sessions. They reached 80 meters when the dominant male raised his head. He was known in the records as BW1. 17 years old, 210 kilograms, dominant for 4 years. Samuel had watched him block leopards, had watched him break up internal group fights with a single movement. He was an animal that processed information quickly and acted with economy. No unnecessary theater, no excessive warnings. BW1 stood still for 3 seconds, his eyes fixed in their direction. Then he took a step forward. "We pull back," said Samuel. They pulled back. BW1 tracked them with his gaze until they were outside his tolerance line, then returned to the group. But the message had been delivered with precision. That day, in that moment, the boundary was there. The group was the buffer. As long as BW1 decided the team was a threat, F7 would remain inaccessible. Samuel reported the situation to Claire at 11:15. She listened without interrupting him. "Second attempt in the morning," she said. "Different light conditions. The group may be more relaxed after rest. If the infant is still being carried tomorrow, we need to reassess the entire protocol." The second morning brought low fog and a thin rain that had started before dawn and did not stop. F7 was still carrying. The team documented the group's behavior with long-range cameras. The other females circled F7 with a consistency that Samuel found disturbing. Disturbing in the sense that it was too recognizable. They would approach for brief periods, look at the infant, touch F7 lightly on the shoulder or head, then retreat. There was a younger, subadult female who tried to sit beside F7 for almost 20 minutes. F7 did not drive her away. Sometimes F7 vocalized softly, a sound Samuel could not classify with precision. It was none of the catalog calls. It sat somewhere between low-frequency social contact and something without a name in any field manual. BW1 stayed within 8 meters of her for most of the day. He did not interfere. He did not try to redirect the group away from her. He simply remained, in a way that, in any other animal, Samuel would have called vigil. The second approach attempt was made with Claire present at 1400 hours. They reached 60 meters before BW1 rose again. This time, he did not simply stand his ground. He advanced 4 steps, beat his chest once, a sound that traveled through the wet canopy like a muffled shot, and vocalized. The rest of the group disappeared into the vegetation in seconds. F7 went with them, still holding the infant. Claire stood in the rain for a moment after the group vanished. "He's protecting her," she said. It was not an analysis. It was an acknowledgement. "The whole group is." Samuel did not respond. He was counting the seconds of silence that followed BW1's vocalization. The forest took 43 seconds to resume its normal sounds. The third day was the longest. They found the group further in, 300 meters beyond the previous position. The group had moved during the night. Not in flight, the track pattern indicated a deliberate and slow movement, but in the same direction F7 seemed to want to go. Samuel had no explanation for this. There was no clear documentation of guerrilla groups coordinating displacement based on a female's grief behavior, but it was what the observational data showed. F7 was slower. The team managed detailed behavioral notes from 90 meters using high-resolution optical equipment. The infant showed unmistakable signs. There was no doubt about the clinical state. Claire recorded everything without comment, with the expression of someone documenting something they do not know how to classify. "She knows," said James in the afternoon, as they repositioned for a different angle of observation. Samuel did not ask what he meant. It was a question the scientific literature did not resolve easily. How much a gorilla cognitively processes about death. How much the carrying behavior is caregiving instinct that does not switch off versus something closer to refusal. There was no consensus. There was only the behavior, which was real, which was there, which had now lasted 72 hours. At 1900 hours, before they lost the light, Samuel made the day's entry in the field diary. Duration of carrying, 73 hours. Distance traveled by the group, approximately 420 meters toward the interior. Approach attempts by the team, 4. Access success, 0. He looked at what he had written and sat in silence for a moment. Outside the shelter, the Bwindi forest made its nighttime sounds. Crickets, the distant drain of water, some nocturnal bird he didn't identify. 6 years in that forest, and there were still sounds he could not name. The fourth day broke clear for the first time that week. Real light filtered through the canopy, reaching the ground with the specific quality of mornings that came after heavy rain. A luminosity that made everything sharper than it should be, as if the entire forest had been washed and set back in place. Samuel found the group before 7. 7 was sitting on a low rise between two buttress roots of an old fig tree. The infant was in her lap. She was still, completely still, in a way he rarely saw in a waking gorilla. She was not sleeping. Her eyes were open. She was simply there, holding the infant, looking at a point in front of her that was nothing. The group was spread around her in normal activity, grooming, foraging, the juveniles exploring the area with that perpetual energy that does not stop even on hard days. But there was an undeclared organization in their spacing. No one moved beyond a radius that would put F7 outside visual range. BW1 was 12 meters from her. He was eating leaves from a climbing plant, his back to her, but with his head positioned so that any movement she made would be immediately detectable in his peripheral vision. Samuel watched for 40 minutes without attempting to approach. Then F7 did something he had not seen in any of the 3 previous days. She looked down at the infant for a long moment. She raised one hand and ran her fingers through his fur, slowly, from his head down to his back. The same grooming gesture she had repeated hundreds of times over the 4 days, but this time without the examining quality, without the intensity of searching. It was different. It was closer to a gesture of closing than to anything else Samuel could name. Then F7 tilted the infant forward, carefully, with a delicacy that was entirely inconsistent with the physical strength she possessed, and set him on the ground in front of her. Samuel stopped breathing for a moment. F7 remained seated, her hands now in her own lap, looking at the infant. She had not released him in any abrupt way. She had not moved away. She had simply stopped carrying him, as if there were a difference she knew how to make between the two things. BW1 raised his head. He looked at F7. He looked at the infant on the ground. Then he began moving toward her, slowly, with weight distributed the way they do when they do not want to appear a threat to members of their own group. He reached a meter away. He stopped. Then he extended his hand and touched the infant lightly, once with the back of his fingers. The subadult female who had tried to sit beside F7 on the second day approached as well. She touched F7's shoulder. F7 did not move. Samuel activated the radio. "Claire, you need to come now." The assessment took place at 10:18 in the morning, with the group 45 meters away, the smallest distance BW1 had tolerated in 4 days. F7 had moved about 6 meters from the point where she had set the infant down. She was seated with her back turned, eating leaves with a slowness that seemed less like hunger than occupation, something to do with her hands while the world around her finished reorganizing what it needed to reorganize. The team worked fast and in silence. The infant male, 7 months, no signs of external cause of death. Samples collected for analysis. Records documented. The pneumonia hypothesis would be confirmed or ruled out in the weeks that followed, but the clinical profile was consistent with acute respiratory infection in a young infant during a period of adverse climatic exposure. Claire worked with the efficiency of someone who knows she has a specific window before the group decides the distance is wrong. When she finished, she moved away with the team without making any abrupt movements. BW1 tracked them with his gaze until they disappeared into the vegetation. That afternoon, Samuel sat at the monitoring post and wrote the field report while there was still enough light that he didn't need the lantern. 96 hours of continuous post-mortem carrying behavior. 4 approach attempts blocked by the dominant male. Voluntary deposition of the infant on the 4th day. Group behavior consistent with grief documentation in primates, social touch, close proximity, reduced activity around the bereaved female. He looked at the report when he finished. The words made sense individually. As a whole, they seemed insufficient. There was a column on the forms for additional ranger observations. It was a small column designed for logistical notes, terrain condition, equipment interference, repositioning coordinates. Samuel looked at it for a moment. Then he wrote, F7 carried the infant for 96 hours. She set him down when she was ready. The group waited together. He closed the notebook. On the morning of the 5th day, Samuel returned to the north sector before dawn, as he had done on the 4 previous days. The group was present, in normal activity. The juveniles running between the shrubs, the adults in mutual grooming, BW, one standing at the highest point of the slope with the quality of vigilance that never fully switched off. F7 was in the middle of the group. She was eating, choosing leaves with the same deliberate care as always, discarding the ones that didn't serve, bringing to her face the ones that did. One of the juveniles ran past her, and she ignored him, as she normally did when there was no reason to concern herself with the running of juveniles. Samuel observed her for 1 hour and 19 minutes before recording anything. What he eventually noted was simple, normal behavior. Full integration with the group. No residual isolation. And then, because the form had no space for more than that, and because he did not know exactly how to classify what he had witnessed over those 4 days, he looked at the forest for a long moment. At the closed canopy above, at the light filtering through in irregular fragments, at the sounds that continued regardless of anything that happened inside them, and put the notebook in his pocket. There were things the Bwindi forest taught that did not fit in any form. 6 years had been enough time for Samuel to understand that. Perhaps not enough, still, to stop trying to find the words, but enough to know that when he couldn't find them, the problem was not the silence. The problem was that some things exist whole before they exist named. And F7 had carried her infant for 96 hours not because she did not know, but because she knew in a way the entire forest recognized and waited and did not interfere until she was finished.